Hey, everyone. I was going to say Pro Football Focus. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's the Blue-White Breakdown with Johnny McGonigal and Bob Flounders, talking Penn State football as we inch closer to spring. February 22nd already, Johnny. And I don't know where you are, but tomorrow it's supposed to be like 70 degrees in certain parts of Pennsylvania. I'm pumped for it, but I also know that there's only 28 days in February, which means March is here, which means spring practice is here. So I'm excited. I hope you're excited too.
Absolutely, Bob. No, I mean, it's supposed to be pretty nice tomorrow being, again, we're recording this Wednesday. So on Thursday, I'm going to try and get out to the range if I can, hit a few balls. Look, I'm wearing my Patty's Green hoodie from Sea Isle. I'm manifesting good weather. I need the summer. I really need it at this point. Memorial Day can't come fast enough. Spring can't come fast enough. The spring game on April 15th should be interesting. So yeah, a lot of stuff moving around here. We're getting some nicer weather. Let's hopefully keep it that way.
Yeah, do I have this right? You're a big beach guy. Is that correct? In the summer
yeah, down the shore. Yeah, in Sea Isle. Yep, Sea Isle is the spot for the McGonigals for sure.
I love it. Well, hopefully it'll be here real soon. I think, knock on wood, the winter's been I said knock on wood, fairly mild. I'm hoping for not a miserable March, but let's see if we can get through these next couple of weeks, get to spring practice, get through the scouting combine, then it's the draft, and then the next thing you know, you're going to be on the beach with your families, fun in the sun. I love the idea of it, but let's talk. You had a really interesting post on PennLive. We're taping this 10:30 Wednesday morning. I know you lean pretty heavily on Pro Football Focus, as do I, but it's a really great resource to really delve into just kind of specifically what Penn State players are doing, well and maybe not well, and maybe who's under the radar. And because Pro Football Focus really looks at the whole country and kind of how they're doing specifically, snap counts, all that stuff, what they're really good at, maybe what they're not so great at. Great resource, but you have a post out about maybe the top returning talent in the country in college football, in their minds, the way that they look at the game. Pro Football Focus. Lo and behold, 5 Penn Staters are on the list. Some of them are really high up on the list. I think they ranked the top 10 at all of the spots. I'm going to hand it over to you, and then maybe I have a little interesting exercise we can do after we talk about these Fab 5 of Penn State, about maybe who isn't on the list now, but maybe next fall might be on that PFF list. Because I think there's a really good chance there's 3 or 4 guys I know I'm looking at that I think have a chance to have really huge 2023s.
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned the combine. I'll be out there next week in Indianapolis with the 7 Penn Staters there, and I wouldn't be surprised if a few of these 5 on the list currently will be in Indianapolis next year. Nick Singleton won't be allowed to go. Abdul won't be allowed to go because they'll be back at Penn State for a 3rd season. But Kalen King made the cut, Chop Robinson, and Olu Fashanu as well, all ranking within the top 10 of their positions when PFF put all this together and said, hey, who are the top 10 returners in college football after everyone already declared for the draft, after the transfer portal closed. Who were the top returners at each position? And Penn State has 5, and it's telling they didn't have any going into the 2022 season, which a little surprised Joey Porter Jr. didn't land himself in there somehow. But look, to have 5 here, they're one of 9 teams across the country with at least 5. You want to give a guess as to some of those teams? I'm not going to. It'd be boring podcasting to try and name all 9, Bob. But yeah, I guess you can figure who would be near the top of that list.
I'm guessing there's a pretty nice little SEC influence on the list. I'm sure there's a little bit of a Big Ten influence with the Buckeyes, maybe Michigan, Georgia, Alabama. I don't know about Tennessee, but I'm just trying to look at some other schools. Clemson would be another one. Is there a surprise school on the list though that really surprised you when you put it together?
Well, a surprise list that might not be on the list was Alabama because they always lose so much. I think they had 3 returners among the top 10 positionally across the country. So Michigan and Georgia had 8. Ohio State and Florida State had 7.
Florida State's going to be good this year.
Yeah, as long as Jordan Travis stays healthy, I think they have a good season ahead of them. And then LSU, Texas, USC, Clemson, and Penn State all had 5. Interestingly, Clemson, all 5 of theirs were defensive players. Penn State and Clemson, the only 2 schools to have a top 10 player on each level of the defense, so defensive line, linebacker, and in the secondary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Penn State, for them to have Nick Singleton in there, I think all these guys are justified to be ranked in the top 10. And again, PFF uses their metrics, their numbers to justify all this. They're not just throwing darts at a board here. I mean, Nick Singleton was second in the Power 5 in yards after contact.
Yeah.
Look at Olu Fashanu. I mean, he would have been a first-round pick if he left early. Kalen King was the top corner in the Power 5 in single coverage. And expect to see him, playing plenty man coverage again this upcoming season. These guys were so integral to Penn State's success, and in 2022, and they're on track to be those guys going into the 2023 season. And it's interesting to see the parallels. It makes sense. It's like kind of a no-duh situation. Like, you have really good players, you have a pretty good chance of winning the national title, or you have good odds to do that. But yeah, those 9 teams I mentioned make up 9 of the top 11 odds to win the national championship. And you have Alabama and Tennessee at the tail end there as well. But yeah, Penn State's in that conversation in the preseason. It's only February, but they're in that conversation primarily because of these top 5 players they've got. Stars win national championships. So it'll be interesting.
Johnny, did you say Penn State right now 25-1? Is that the number on Penn State? Penn State fans, if you're feeling good about the season, you're feeling good about Penn State's ability to develop players, young players, maybe a new quarterback who we can talk about. But 25-1 sure seems like a pretty fair price on Penn State. Obviously, they're not going to be on the short list. They still have a lot to prove, even though they played really well last year. There's a couple of heavyweights that they have to get past in the Big Ten East. They haven't been to the playoff yet. So 25-1 is a very intriguing price, and I think it's worth it. I think at 25-1 with what they have coming back, Johnny, I think that's a fair bet, and I think that's a bet that if I were a Penn State fan, I would embrace that. I think that's a fair odds on Penn State because I think they can certainly exceed that kind of value. I think they are a team that could find their way into the playoff or come really close. And if they get into the playoff, anything, as we saw in the semis last year, anything can happen. Anyone can get to the final. They certainly have recruited well. But yeah, when I look at those 5 names, I also think that tells a really good story, Johnny, about what Penn State and James Franklin have been really good at the last couple of years. You have a kid like Nick Singleton, who is in state. So they keep a lot of their best players in state, and he's a 5-star player, which speaks to Franklin's ability to recruit. You look at a kid like Chop Robinson, who was a 5-star talent at Maryland. It speaks to Penn State's ability to kind of recruit and add players via the transfer portal. You look at Olu, you look at Kalen King. Those are some guys that they were talented players in high school, but it also speaks to Penn State's ability to kind of develop players really quickly. Abdul Carter would be another, obviously, an example. In-state player, 4-star player, didn't get there till August. Another development guy right away. So I really think when you look at all 5 of those guys, they really tell kind of the story of why Penn State has come a long way in a short time. Those guys have all arrived on Pro Football Focus's radar. But Penn State's been able to kind of do it a little bit differently, I think, with each one of them. And I just think when you're good at all of those phases, in-state recruiting, getting 5 stars, attacking the transfer portal, and then developing 4 stars, it's a great sign, I think, for Penn State moving forward.
Yeah, and not only the means of which they've gotten that talent, but how they're spread out and how you're affecting every level of the game. I mentioned that they're one of 2 teams with Clemson having a top 10 guy at each level on the defense, but they're also one of only 4 teams that have a top 10 running back and a top 10 offensive lineman. You look at some teams. I was curious to see where certain teams were represented. Like Washington showed up a few times, but they had 2 wide receivers, so they're a little heavy at the wideout spot. Penix is a good quarterback, obviously, but you just look at certain teams and they're like, all right, they're heavy on one position. They're heavy. Penn State, for them to have a top 10 guy at running back, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, and in the secondary, I mean, those are all phases of the game in which if you need it, you can go win it. If you need to go run the ball down someone's throat, you can win it. If you need a disruptive play in the secondary, et cetera, you need to affect the quarterback. Chop Robinson was, by PFF standard, the best pass rusher in the country last year in terms of his overall grade off the edge and then his pass rushing grade specifically. And so I'd expect him to have another good year. And it's not just those 5 either. It's like those are the anchors of your team. They're the cornerstone pieces. But when you've got an Adisa Isaac opposite Chop Robinson, when you've got, say Drew Shelton or Caden Wallace, on the other side of Olu Fashion, when you have a Katron Allen to balance out and to give, Nick Singleton not only rest, but give him competition, make him step up to the plate and continue to perform the way that he performed as a true freshman. So Kalen King, he's going to get compete. He's going to get competition from Storm Duck and Johnny Dixon. And so it's a well-rounded roster. 5 guys aren't going to win you, a spot in the playoff. But it goes a long way. And like you mentioned, like you teased at the start of the pod, I think that there's a handful of guys on this roster that we could be talking about this time next year as returning top 10 guys at their position nationwide. Yeah,
agree with you. Let's spin it forward to just what we talked about here on the Blue White Breakdown. You already mentioned 2 of the guys that were on my list. I think by this time next year, a guy like Adisa Isaac, considering the progress he made down the stretch of 2022, if he continues to move forward, if he can get maybe a little bit bigger, he was a disruptive player for Penn State down the stretch. It's easy to forget that he had his 2021 season wiped out because of an Achilles injury. He was one of the top players in, I believe, Penn State's 2019 class, played behind some really good defensive ends and just couldn't see the field a lot early in his career. They had some all Big Ten ends, Odafe Owe, even Ettore Gross Matos his first year, Shaka Tony. At other schools, he was probably going to be playing a lot earlier and he'd probably be a little bit more developed, but it's kind of worked out for Adisa. He's been patient. He's been able to come back from a significant injury. I still think his best football is ahead of him. I want to get your thoughts on Adisa, but I also want to reference the other player that you mentioned, Katron Allen, as really, I don't know if there's a better compliment to an elite runner like Nick Singleton when you could have a guy like Katron Allen. But those 2 guys for sure, easily could be getting a lot of Pro Football Focus love, come the fall.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about Katron Allen when I was going through these lists.
Yeah.
And I saw at running back that Michigan had 2 guys, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And, that with how that rushing attack played out for Michigan last year, and they made the playoff, you could see a Katron Allen taking a step up more than he already did, which was, again, he had a really good season. So I could totally see that. My thing with Adisa is, is he going to be around? Because, he had an NFL decision to make prior to this offseason after the Rose Bowl. And these guys are top 10 returners. So is he going to already be off to the NFL? Because I was thinking about Curtis Jacobs too.
Yeah.
Is he going to be off?
I was just talking about this. Will they be on Pro Football Focus's?
Oh, mid-season.
Yeah, mid-season.
Okay, all right.
I'm not talking about, obviously. I just meant in the fall. By this time, they're going to be getting a little bit more love in the fall. That's all.
I gotcha. I thought you were speaking to 2024.
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, no, I can totally see Adisa being there. If we're talking about a mid-season top 10 or whatever, Adisa could definitely be there. I wouldn't be surprised if Denai Sutton's there, if he's made an impact to that level by that point. Yep. I mentioned Storm Duck. He was an all ACC caliber player when he was healthy at North Carolina. Another sneaky one, and it's gonna depend on how quickly he acclimates. And
I know who you're gonna say. I know who you're gonna say, but
I'm gonna say Dante Cephas.
Yes, I was thinking that's who I was gonna bring him up.
Yeah, because look, he was an uber talented guy at Kent State, over 1,900 yards, 12 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. He is enrolling in the summer, though. He's not here during the
Yeah.
spring, so he doesn't have those 15 practices, in the spring game to get that rapport with Drew Aller. But if he's able to come in there in the summer and he's an experienced guy and get acclimated and get, into this offense and become the number one target that a lot of people think he has the talent to do it, we could be talking about him in the fall. And he has 2 years of eligibility. So if we are speaking to 2024 Bob and Johnny, and we're talking about this list this time next year, he's a guy that could be on it because someone needs to step up at that wide receiver position. And, we've talked about Keandre Lambert-Smith and Harrison Wallace and even, an Amari Evans or, a Caden Saunders maybe if he puts it all together. But I really think Dante Cephas has the inside track, has the ability to become the number one target in an offense that is Drew Aller at quarterback, which is pretty promising.
Yeah, I thought about Cephas right away, and you're right. It's probably not even unfair to him to mention him. He hasn't even gotten to campus yet, but boy, what he was able to do, in the MAC, and he did some damage to some pretty good teams too. Dangerous player. I read your story on him and he was able to do. Teammate of Daquan Hardy's, and just you can see the connection to Penn State a little bit. Boy, if he can settle in and get on the same page with Drew Aller and Mike Yursich can kind of get a long look at him, and he can do some work with Marcus Higgins. But yeah, the wide receiver room is a big part of where eventually Penn State will end up, I think, in 2023. It could be great. It could be, above average. It could be, it's maybe of all the position groups, to me, that's really one that I think is going to go a long way towards shaping the season, good or maybe, not quite up to expectations, but they are certainly a talented room, and James Franklin and his staff did the right thing in really being aggressive, I think, in the transfer portal, because you just can't count on, unproven players to really make the jump. As great as Keandre was, in the Rose Bowl, if you look at his history, I know that there were other options in the passing game. You see flashes of his ability. You saw it in the Purdue game right out of the chute last year with that yards after catch touchdown in a big spot. But then you go a couple weeks, you don't see much from him. So I think Franklin and his staff knew what they had to do, and that was the priority. And a guy like Cephas, boy, Johnny, if he can kind of just continue what he was doing in the MAC, I mean, he in the Penn State offense with those skilled people around him, where he's not the focus of attention, that is a really, really dangerous thought, I think, if you are a defensive coordinator or a corner. I wanted to bring up one other player, Theo Johnson. I know that he's not quite the finished product yet, but when you talk about his size and how the strides he made as a blocker and what he can do in the passing game, I would think at some point he's going to make some people a little bit more aware of him. And I'm just curious to see how he would grade out, with Pro Football Focus. I know they look at a lot of different things, and Penn State maybe uses him a little bit differently than maybe I don't know that he's maybe a traditional tight end just yet. But at 260 pounds, he sure could be very soon.
Yeah, Bob, you took the name right out of my mouth. I had two lined up, and I don't want this to be like us predicting a team to win the national championship in March Madness and having like 12 brackets and throwing 12 names out there. And if a couple of them hit, we get credit. But to throw out two more, Theo Johnson was one. And I just think the opportunity is there with Brenton Strange gone, and the physical traits that he has, the way he came on at the end of the season, with a catch of 25 yards or more in 6 of his final 7 games, like the impact that he made in that Rose Bowl. And I just think if you can get a little bit more consistency, not only out of him, but out of the play calling, out of everyone involved and getting him involved, I think you'd be talking about a top 10 tight end in the country next year. And then another one, which might fly under the radar a little bit, but Landon Tengwall, I just think has the talent at guard, and he's going to be lined up, assuming he stays at left guard, lined up next to Olu Fashanu, which might make his life a little easier. Not that he'll need it, but he is a really talented dude. And, if he comes back from that injury that, he suffered prior to the Michigan game, and he's all right, in spring camp and going into fall and everything, I mean, that could be a juggernaut of a left side of a line. for Penn State to, obviously work their pass protections around and run behind if you're Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. And I think that the increased attention on Olu Fashanu this season could also bring increased attention to Landon Tengwall. And I think that'll be a good thing for him because I think he's talented enough to step up to the plate and deliver on that attention, on that recognition. And I just think that the Penn State offensive line has a chance here to really be the anchor of this team. It was a positive last year, and it was a really, for the outsider, for the national talking head or so, that it might not have been, really on their radar. It still might not be on their radar, but I think this Penn State offensive line has a real chance, and Tengwall is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I think if you're a Penn State fan and you were following the winter workouts closely, it was good to see Olu. I think he got a shout out as a worker, but just to see him running and moving around with what he was dealing with his injury. I mean, it was a knee injury. I think everyone they haven't said it, but I think most people know he was dealing with something, I think, lower body related. And I think they were erring on the side of caution by holding him out. But when he decided to come back, the question I was always curious about when he was actually going to be able to start running and doing those kinds of things. I think it's a really good sign that he is definitely rounding back into form. He is a big, even in the picture, he just looks good. He just looks like he is a athletic, big left tackle. So kudos to Penn State for developing him. One more player I wanted to talk about with regard to, I know you said we mentioned a lot of players, but honestly, Johnny, they have a lot of good players. They really do. There's a couple of players that we could talk about that wouldn't surprise me, but at this point it would be a reach. I just wondered, the player I'm going to mention, I don't know if he's ever going to be maybe a model great grader by Pro Football Focus because of the way he is, kind of what his game's about. Curtis Jacobs, at outside linebacker, not the biggest guy. You look at him and you look at Abdul Carter, you're talking about two different body types, but they both can run. Abdul Carter is more of, I think, of an all-around disruptor, but Curtis can make his presence felt in coverage. He can make his presence felt as a blitzer, even as a pass rusher. Experienced player, came back, and I think he's right around 230 pounds, and maybe that's just ideal for him. Maybe you don't want to get him too much bigger, but I think when you're going to talk about linebackers in college football in 2023 in the fall, especially outside and especially maybe a linebacker in space, I don't know that I could name, a half dozen better linebackers, maybe space coverage linebackers than Curtis. He was a high recruit. He's played here for a long time. He's now familiar with Manny Diaz's defense. With other teams really worried about Abdul Carter, I mean, I'm painting the picture of him getting not a lot of attention. And if you're not going to pay attention to Curtis Jacobs and you're an offense, what he can do with his speed and with his ability to recognize plays, he can end them before they get started.
He definitely can. I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I think he's the kind of talent that, like you said, can cause havoc. He's done it already. I still go back to that Minnesota game where he had 14 tackles. He's that kind of guy. He's that kind of guy. If you don't block him, if you don't take him into account. And one last player, because I feel like we're contractually obligated to mention his name during every podcast. And I mentioned him a little bit earlier, but Drew Aller,
Yeah, how can you not?
I mean, one, I have to mention him, but no, honestly, I mean, if we're talking about top 10 players of their position in the country, he's a 5-star guy. He has all the tools. We've seen it in spurts. Every talent evaluator in high school saw it. As long as he doesn't hit those growing pains, and look, he'll be a first-year starter, so we expect him to have some growing pains. He's not. Is he God? Is he superhuman? We'll find out. But no, look, I think he obviously has the talent. And he'll have the running game. He'll have the support. He'll have the pieces around him, especially like we mentioned, Theo Johnson and Dante Cephas comes in. It's not like a sleeper either. Like he's what, the 10th or 11th, best odds to win the Heisman, something crazy like that. It might even be better than that. So yeah, I feel like we'd be doing this podcast and our listeners a disservice if we didn't mention old number 15 on the pod, but he's definitely one that could find his way there.
I agree. Penn State doesn't need its young quarterbacks to win a lot of games in the fall because of the way that they are set up, the way that they're, complementary football. The offensive line's good. The tight end room is good. If one or two of the young wideouts or one of the two transfer portal guys step up, the wide receiver room is going to be much improved, even without Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley, and it's not like, when Trace McSorley, they took the training wheels off Trace McSorley in 2016. He didn't really have a lot of playing experience before that 2016 season. If Hackenberg doesn't get hurt in that bowl game, he basically has not, he doesn't really have, he doesn't have any. I mean, Drew is, I think, a lot more comfortable than most first year starters. The talent is obvious. And I think he's a different situation than Christian Hackensberg was at Penn State, because Christian Hackensberg, everything was on. He had to do everything if they were going to be in the game. And that's just not the case with Drew. And I think if he can get comfortable and he starts to relax and just let his ability take over, by October, I mean, I think absolutely he'll be a guy that should be grading out very well. And that's not to say that Bo Prabula is not a guy that at some point could make an impact on Penn State season. But, I mean, we all know what the plan is. Drew's that good, and he looks comfortable. He handles himself well in interviews. And they don't have to ask him to win a lot of games. But the good thing is, though, he has the talent in the fourth quarter to win a game. I think he's shown that. He was comfortable on the road at Purdue when he made some plays. He just missed a big play to Tyler Warren in that game. So I just think that Penn State is if they're healthy, they're going to be really a handful. And that's why, circle back to 25-1, I think that's a pretty good bet on Penn State this particular year.
Yeah, if you're a Penn State fan, just take the $30-$40, whatever it is that you'd spend on beer at Beaver Stadium, and just log on to DraftKings and just place it on that. I think it's fine. I think it's pretty good value, especially the teams around them. Like Florida State's 20-1. Let's see. I think Tennessee is also 25-1, and they lose so much. I just don't see that. USC 14-1 is an interesting pull. But yeah. It's a gauntlet, but we saw two Big Ten teams make the college football playoff last year. Mm-hmm. If they're able to split the Ohio State Michigan games and run the table the rest, you're looking at a playoff team. So we'll see. I do think that they have the talent to do it. They have the top end talent, and I do think they have the depth to do it as well. We've outlined that here on the Blue White Breakdown, Bob. I think that they have. I think it's a decent bet. I really do. 25-1. I think is a decent number for them.
Yeah, I'm not even a Penn State grad. I'm a University of Scranton grad, and I'm saying I think 25-1 is absolutely a live bet. If you can get it, I don't know how long I get it now, because if you're going to wait around till September to find out how good this team is, if you look at their schedule, if you want to get the price, I think now's the time to get a good price on Penn State, because if the season plays out the way that it could, that number is just going to decrease. So now's the time to jump on it. I don't think you're going to see it go higher. I think you're only going to see it go lower. Johnny, as always, a pleasure. I know you're going to have a great time out in Indianapolis. That's still a couple days away, but we'll be back, I think, next week to talk more. I have a good idea for next week, Johnny. I'll talk to you about it after we get done with this podcast that'll lead into the Combine, which is it's always spread out, right? But it really begins to get interesting next week with the Combine, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, next week I'll be driving out from Pittsburgh to Indy and talking to. I think I'll be there long enough to talk to everyone that Penn State's sending out there. They're sending 7 guys. Yeah, especially Joey Porter Jr., Jair Brown, guys who could go in Joey's case the first round. You're looking at maybe second, third, fourth rounders, Brenton Strange. So. Yeah, they'll be available for interviews, and I'll be there at the convention center in Indy. Looking forward to it.
Beautiful. Love to hear it. All right, guys, we'll be back next week. Have a great weekend. It's going to get warm on Thursday, so stay cool. I can't believe I said that during the winter.